Hey, folks, welcome back to another episode of the award-winning Legends of Sport podcast. I'm your host, Andy Bernstein. This week's guest is journalist and author Paul Knepper. Paul is here to talk about his current book, Moses Malone, The Life of a Basketball Prophet. I was really intrigued to receive Paul's book. I must admit, I didn't know much about Moses Malone before reading it. I photographed the tail end of his career, but never got to know Moses as a player on or off the court. The 1983 NBA Finals was the first finals I shot for the NBA. The Philadelphia 76ers beat the Lakers, and Moses was the MVP. But I think it's safe to say that Moses may have been overshadowed by the great Dr. J winning his first championship during that finals. Known as the chairman of the boards, Moses was a rebounding machine and still holds the NBA record for career offensive rebounds. A three-time MVP, Moses was a relentlessly hard worker and perhaps a reluctant superstar who may have been misunderstood by the media and the public. Thanks to Paul's book, some of those misconceptions may no longer apply. Moses was the first to jump from high school to the pros, and he paved the way for future superstars like Kevin Garnett and Kobe Bryant. He played a style of in-the-paint basketball that may be long forgotten in today's era of three-point shots. Paul and I touched on so many interesting aspects of Moses Malone's life and career. It was really a great conversation. So enjoy this episode with Paul Knepper about the legendary Moses Malone. And as always, I'll see you on the backside. Well, I want to welcome author Paul Knepper to the Legends of Sport podcast. Paul, great to connect with you, man. I was trying to figure out if our paths have crossed because you look very familiar to me, and I know that our NBA life kind of probably crossed at some point.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, it's possible we've been in the same room, but
Mhm.
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, it's good to see you. Where are you? Where are you calling in from, man?
I'm in Austin, Texas.
Very nice. Yeah. How's the weather there? It can't be as
Uh,
cold as the East Coast, right?
no, it's a little dreary. It's colder than usual for this time of year, but I lived in New York most of my life, so I'm constantly reminding myself that it's even on a bad day here, it's better than there. So,
Yeah, I'm in New York. I grew up in Brooklyn, went to
oh,
school
okay.
in Western Massachusetts at UMass, and then left in '78 for the weather, man. I never looked back.
I hear you. I
Been
hear
in LA
you.
ever since. So, Paul, so great to connect with you. Thank you for reaching out about this fabulous book about Moses Malone. Um, I really want to get into this conversation. I really, people contact us a lot about books, and I can't read every book I get, and I won't interview the author unless I can have time to read the book, and it actually interests me, to be honest with you. And
Right.
I have to tell you that Moses always intrigued me because when I came into the league, like 81, 82, by 83, I was working, pretty regularly for the NBA. In fact, the 83 finals was the first finals I shot for the NBA.
Oh, wow.
And yeah,
I didn't
so
realize that.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I shot in both cities, and it was a thing. And so I was a young whippersnapper getting my feet wet, and here I am, with Moses and Dr. J and Mr. Katz and the whole cast of characters from the Sixers, Andrew Toady. And of course, they're playing the Lakers, who were not my Lakers, but they were playing in my city, and
Right.
they win the championship. And that was my first taste of really being in a championship locker room, quite frankly. In the old forum, the locker room was like a closet. And just a very side story to this, my friend. So I think Dr. J was the MVP, right, of the series, or was
No,
Moses the MVP?
Moses was. Yeah.
Moses was the MVP, but it was Doc's first trophy, and he was kind of
Right.
on his way out. The end of a glorious career in the ABA and NBA. And so the NBA had one publication in those days called NBA Today. It was like a tabloid. And the editor said, "You got to get a picture of Dr. J with the trophy. It's his only trophy, blah, blah, blah." So we couldn't get him. We couldn't get him. Finally, there was a little bit of a break in the chaos, and I pulled him into, this is true, pulled him into the men's room, And I wish I had the picture here to show you. But the photo is of Dr. J with a huge smile on his face with the trophy with a urinal in the background.
That's
Hilarious.
fantastic.
Yeah, unbelievable. So I'm going to tell you what intrigued me about Moses, and then you obviously need to tell me why you were intrigued and why you wanted to write this book. Because Moses to me was an enigma, man. I came in the league, and here's this guy, not the like let's just say not the perfect physical specimen for an NBA player, and especially at his position. And the NBA was so different back then anyway, but he was a grinder, and you could tell that this guy just brought the lunch pail every single game. Um, but I never got to know Moses. I shot him obviously when he was in Houston, and then well, he's in Philly, and then Houston, and then he finished up. I guess the last time I shot him, he was in Atlanta, because I do have a picture that I found of him in an Atlanta uniform. But Paul, tell me what intrigued you about Moses, because he's such it's such a character of NBA history that I don't think a lot of people know about.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of hit on it a little bit. You said that you didn't really know Moses. I got to tell you, Andy, you're not alone.
Yeah.
Nobody knew Moses.
Yeah.
Nobody in the media, nobody with a league, nobody knew Moses. And he was, I mean, my interest was piqued somewhat because I was born in '77. So really, when I started getting heavy into basketball, like in the late '80s, Moses was past his prime then,
Hmm.
and I remember him as this kind of older, plotting center, past his prime and just sweating profusely and hands on his knees and goggles up on his above his head and looking tired and old, frankly.
Yeah.
And so, I've talked to a lot of other basketball players, and you talk to guys from that era, and they just rave about Moses, go on and on about how great Moses was.
Yeah.
And so that kind of piqued my interest, just the fact that here's this all-time great player that I really don't know much about. I didn't even know he was the first modern day guy to go straight from high school to pros, which is a
Hmm.
wonderful story. And
Yeah.
then you start looking at his career, and he's one of only 9 guys to win 3 or more MVP awards. It's a very exclusive list.
Hmm.
As that '83 Sixers team is one of the greatest teams ever, and he was the best player on that team. He's the greatest offensive rebounder statistically in league history by an enormous margin.
Yeah.
So he
That,
had this,
that's I have to just interrupt you. That surprised
yeah.
me because I would have bet the house that it was Bill Russell. I mean, just I never
Well,
saw
you,
Bill play,
well,
but yeah.
well, you know what? It was offensive rebounds wasn't an official stat until like
Ah,
1974.
gotcha.
So
Okay.
Wilt and Russell might be ahead of him, but since they
Okay.
kept this stat officially,
Right.
um, but yeah, it was more. The impetus for me was really here's this incredible player, a trailblazer, an all-time great
Mhm.
that I personally knew relatively little about, and that people just don't talk about anymore.
Yeah.
When people talk about the greats of the game, he never comes up anymore, and that was kind of spurred me on as well. Like I wanted to kind of share his story, particularly for younger generations who
Mhm.
didn't get the chance to see him, and for older generations like yourself,
Yeah.
who I'm not calling you old, Andy, but
That's all
you've been
right.
around a bit.
I
But
call
but for
myself
pe
old.
but for but for even for people who watched him play and who view him as this kind of enigma, who didn't really know anything
Mhm.
about the man behind the scowl.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I love the fact that you opened the book about a story about Wemby, okay? Because this guy, I mean, it blew my mind when I saw him play for the first time. And the NBA sent me down to his very first home game. Well, very first game was a home game. And his very first basket was a three-pointer from a guy 7'5", to me, like I'm thinking Manute Bol, with such a
Right.
novelty,
Yeah.
and Nelly would have him shoot threes and all that. I can't even imagine like Moses taking a three.
No.
I can't
No.
imagine Moses taking anything more than 3 feet away from the basket. But
No.
the way the game has changed so much, it was so. I got to tell you, it was so refreshing to read your book and go back in time to that era of the centers with their back to the basket, or somebody like Moses who's just hungry for the ball every time. Um, so, what were three things that you can point to, Paul, in the book that, well, in your research as you wrote the book, that just either, well, you mentioned one that you didn't know he was the first one to come out to
Right.
well, let's give that one. So what are the other two? Two other things that might have surprised you.
Um, to be honest, one thing that really jumped out at me was the level of poverty that he grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard that a lot from I talked to a number of college recruiters who recruited him at a high school, and they all gave me some version of the same story, which as one assistant coach put it pretty succinctly. He said, "Paul, I've traveled all around the country. I've recruited kids everywhere. I've seen all kinds of poverty. I've never seen poverty like the Malones."
Mm-hmm.
And you hear that from people, and that just really stuck with me.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I really enjoyed learning about was this world of the Fondy Recreation Center
Mm-hmm.
in Houston, which I had heard of vaguely, and I knew Moses had a relationship with Hakeem, but you
Mm-hmm.
talk to people who played there over the summers, and it was like this magical place where, they talk about, oh, the games were even more competitive than NBA games, and just the amount of talent that played in these summer games. And it started with Moses, and all the Rockets would play there in the summer, and Akeem and Clyde and their whole Phi Slamma Jamma team and
Yeah.
other All Stars when they came through town, and these pickup games were just legendary, and everyone said Moses treated every pickup game at Fondy like it was Game 7 in the NBA Finals, and everybody else had to kind of match that intensity, which led
Yeah.
to these classic battles.
Yeah, and he even went back there post retirement, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
just
He would go, he'd hang out,
yeah,
he coached there, he would still, even after it retired, he would play occasionally,
yeah,
and
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the themes in your book that I know that you realize, but that I didn't. That how much of Moses's inner circle kind of was very tight, and even from high school, the guys he grew up with, they stayed in his life. A couple, three, four guys in the NBA. He had a very small circle that he trusted and that could be himself around, right? Because
Yeah.
I think the and was kind of like a reluctant superstar. I mean, I know you use that, and other people have used that quote about him. Um, but I believe from reading your book, and again, I didn't know Moses, but that he was very misunderstood because you talk about how he particularly didn't like the media, and that's his prerogative. I mean, unfortunately, he's playing in a professional league that you have to kind of be nice to the media most of the time, or at least be somewhat accepting of giving them some time. And that painted him as, just disgruntled or angry or aloof or even unintelligent, right? All of those things were
Absolutely.
really not true. And I'm really thankful to you for bringing that out about him.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot to me. Yeah, that was really fascinating for me to, as I said, to learn about the man behind the scowl,
Yeah.
because he was a completely different person when the cameras were off. He had a wonderful sense of humor. He liked to play practical jokes in the locker
Yeah.
room. Um, there was this stigma that he was unintelligent, and I think some of that also stemmed back to, that he was the first guy to go straight from high school to
Hmm.
pros, and he
Hmm.
took a lot of criticism at the time. And
Hmm.
Moses had a bit of a speech impediment, and he
Hmm.
spoke with a kind of Southern vernacular that doesn't, to a lot of quote unquote sophisticated people, doesn't sound intelligent.
Hmm.
And so there was this perception about him. But, I always say, like, you can't, just from a basketball standpoint, you can't win three MVP awards without having a very high basketball IQ. I
Oh,
don't care
for
how
sure.
good, how talented you are. You have
Yeah.
to have a great understanding and feel for the game.
Yeah.
But a lot of people talked about how smart he was off the court as well.
Hmm.
And then the last thing about his personality that I really enjoyed learning about was he really loved mentoring younger players.
Hmm.
And the two most notable are Charles Barkley and Hakeem.
Mm.
But there are countless others, guys who just had a cup of coffee in the league who I talked to, who said, I couldn't believe that the MVP of the league, here I am, like this fourth round draft pick, back when they used to have, 10 rounds,
Hmm.
whatever,
Hmm.
this fourth round draft pick just trying to make the team, some nobody, that the MVP of the league took me under his wing and was guiding me and trying to instruct me on how to get better.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that was he was a very devoted teammate in that way.
Yeah, and very generous, right?
Yeah,
He didn't have to
yeah,
do that. Um, his nickname was chairman of the boards, obviously because of his rebounding prowess. You had one. anecdote in the book, which was so great about how Moses could tell from a shot, from like the arc of a shot, or where a shot came from, or who shot the shot, where that ball was going to come off the backboard or come off the rim. And I'm just thinking of, you know, I don't even know if Moses could have played in this era today with all the three pointers and well, he could have played obviously, but he couldn't have racked up the same stats of offensive rebounds because guys are chucking up threes like 60 or 70 a game, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. No, he couldn't have. He still would have been a great offensive rebounder, but
Yeah.
the threes lead to longer rebounds, and it's not the same scrum under the basket and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, he would have. He would have had to. He would have had to. You know, if he came along now, he'd be a different. He'd have a different game. He would
Mm.
have to. He would have to play differently.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so you point out in the book very eloquently how Spencer Haywood was really Moses's hero. Um, the young Moses growing up, and I know Spencer very well. You know his story. I know his story, but there might not have been a Moses Malone if Spencer had not done what he did, and taken the league to the Supreme Court and win, and got basically got rid of the 4-year rule. And Moses, I think, was very conscious of that, right? Obviously, gave him the
Absolutely,
opportunity to
absolutely.
come in, and also, Spencer. People don't know how great Spencer Haywood was, and it's another. You
Yeah,
should write that book, but
yeah.
well, Mark Spears already wrote it, but
Right, he did.
but
Yeah,
Spencer just set the table for Moses, who set the table for Kevin Garnett and Kobe and all these guys who came out, and students of the game like KG or Kobe, they know
right.
who kind of paved the way for them. I don't know if a lot of the guys today really know that. I go to events with
No,
Spencer, and they're like, he's a big guy, kind of old, and must have been in the NBA, but I don't know who he is. I mean,
right.
it's almost embarrassing, really, right?
That's a shame. Yeah, no, I mean Spencer. I talked to Spencer for the book because he and Moses were friends,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's a integral figure in the history of the game. You know, Spencer,
Mm.
Oscar's another one who
Oscar, sure. Yeah,
does I think people aren't talk about isn't talked about enough the role that he played in changing the game and what he did for these guys who are making 50, 60 million dollars a year now.
yeah, yeah,
But it's a lineage, and Moses is part of that lineage, and a lot of people helped pave the way. But yeah, I mean,
yeah.
Spencer's at the center of that for sure. And to your point, yes,
Yeah.
Moses was very conscious of that and appreciative of that. And he made a point when Spencer was inducted to the Hall of Fame, Moses was there to support him. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah. So let's talk about that moment or that period of time when when Moses was just head and shoulders above everybody else in high school, right? And you have this great picture in the book of him with his Letterman jacket talking to two girls by the locker. And I love
yeah,
that. I
it's a
love that
great.
picture
I agree.
because he literally looks like a grown man among children.
Yeah.
Um, so he was getting a lot. There was a lot of pressure. He was getting recruited left and right. Coaches are showing up like in the bushes. I mean, it's all you're very, very eloquent about how you describe all of that. And he signs a letter of intent to the University of Maryland with Lefty Driesell, the famous coach. And then he rescinded his acceptance, right? So talk about like the ABA and how they fit into that whole scenario of these young guys who, could have gone to college, but they went for the money.
Yeah, the ABA was, they started in 1967 and it was kind of a ragtag bunch of owners initially, guys who could just scrape together 50 grand and
Mhm.
100 grand and they join up with other guys who could put together 100 grand. And the whole idea was let's try and get a merger with the NBA and get our
Mhm.
big payday that way. I mean the template was what the AFL did with the NFL,
Mhm.
which worked very successfully.
Right.
So, but the ABA didn't. They had no television deal, and most teams had very minimal sponsorship, and so there was just no money in the league.
Mhm.
Um, and they were desperate, but they were desperate to try and acquire talent to get the NBA's attention, and they realized the way to do that was through the college ranks. And
Mhm.
so they started with Spencer. Spencer was the first in 1969, the first guy to leave college early.
Hmm.
And the next few years, there were a number of others. Dr. J, who you mentioned, was one. George
Hmm.
Gervin, some other guys came early.
Yeah.
And the NBA got on that bandwagon. They're like, "Oh, okay, well, we're losing the arms race here."
Yeah,
And
exactly.
then in 1974, it was fascinating. I got a guy in front of it, Bob Kuska, another writer, had years ago interviewed Vince Barilla, who was the GM of the Utah Stars
Hmm.
in 1974, and Vince has been dead like 10 years. And Bob played this recording for me. It was like, an interview from the grave that he's never used.
Hmm.
And Vince's whole thing was like basically the Utah Stars were on the verge of bankruptcy. Their owner was trying to sell. There was speculation the whole league was going to fold.
Hmm.
And this 1974 draft takes place, and they sit there in the room, and one of the other GMs says, the best player available is this high school kid from Petersburg, Virginia.
Hmm.
And Barilla, the GM of the Stars, had never heard of him. It wasn't, I think people assume like the Stars went to this, oh, we're going to make a big splash. We're going to draft the first high school kid.
Yeah.
It was just such a like low budget operation that he just kind of showed up and he heard this from another GM. And in the third round, he's like, what the hell? I'll take a shot on this high school kid
Yeah.
and drafted him.
Yeah.
And so this is in the spring. Moses commits to Maryland. And the Stars are kind of like, well, we think the owner's gonna sell the team. We don't even know if we're gonna be in operation next year.
Hmm.
We'll come back to you at some point, Moses. And I think there was really no reason to believe that they were gonna pony up the money to sign him. So,
Hmm.
but then in late August, they did. The team was sold. That sale ended up being rescinded, but
Hmm.
the team was sold, and the new owner was like, I need a splashy name. I need a big name, a big story to sell tickets. And so they're like, oh, well, why don't we try and sign the high school kid? And so they flew down to Petersburg and Bucky Buckwalter and threw a bunch of money at him. And
Yeah.
he was like, okay,
Yeah.
I'll take the money.
And you described the $5,000 in hundreds or whatever on
Yeah.
the kitchen table or whatever it was.
Yeah.
But was
And
he
not
like,
even, and I love the visual too. What the
yeah,
kitchen table is an orange crate.
I
It was
know
an
it's
old
crazy.
orange crate.
Yeah.
Like they didn't have an actual table.
No, you were very descriptive in your book because I could visualize a lot of this stuff. So was he keeping Maryland like, I mean, did Lefty think that this kid was going to show up and
He thought he was because what happened was Moses, I think, expected to go to Maryland. He went
yeah,
there for the summer. He went to
right,
College Park for the summer,
right.
and then was working out with the other guys. And then
Mhm.
John Lucas likes to tell the story. The first day of class, he wakes up Moses. He said, "Hey, let's go to class." And Moses said, "I'm going pro." So I think Lefty knew. I mean, Lefty knew he
Yeah,
was drafted. I assume he had to know that that was a possibility, but I think
yeah.
he thought it just wasn't going to happen with the Stars. I think he thought it was kind of a publicity stunt and it just,
Mhm.
that he was going to go to college.
And who is advising Moses at that point? I mean, there's these horror stories. I think Spencer even talked about it, about how, they were talking about a lot of money, but there was all backloaded contracts like 20 years later, or when you're 50 years old, you're going to get, half
Yeah,
of it or something.
yeah.
Who was in his corner at that point?
Spencer ended up suing the team, the Denver
Yeah,
franchise in the
Denver.
ABA because
That's right.
it was a BS contract basically.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but so Moses got very lucky in that when he went to Lefty and the guy from the Stars, Bucky Buckwalter, they both went to Lefty and said, we're going to try and work something out here.
Mhm.
Lefty looked after him. Lefty knew a couple of just the whole idea of agents was
Mm.
that was a new notion then.
Yeah,
But
yeah, exactly.
Lefty knew a couple of guys who had represented, I believe, Tom McMillan
Uh-huh.
for Maryland, and they had a relationship with Dean Smith too, and were represented a couple of North Carolina guys.
Mm.
And so before he even signed a contract, Lefty set him up with these guys.
Wow.
And initially, they took him on as unpaid advisors
Uh-huh.
because if he hired them as an agent, he would be ineligible to play college.
Right.
So they gave him some advice. And the first advice was they looked at the contract and it was the exact kind of contract that you were talking about. It was
Yeah.
just terrible, terrible terms. And they said, you can't sign this.
Hmm.
And he didn't, but he rejected that. And the Stars came back and gave him a much more reasonable deal. And
Hmm.
but he had these experienced attorneys who had done some work as as agents, and
Hmm.
I think we're, fortunately for him, I think we're real stand-up guys.
Yeah.
But
Well, so is Lefty. I mean, you got to be
yes,
thinking if you're lefty, 80% of this kid's gonna be, I'm not gonna get him. But yet
right.
he was so generous and I guess very willing to help this young guy, which is amazing, really. You think about it. So I have a question for you because I didn't ask you at the beginning, but the subtitle of the book is "The Life of a Basketball Prophet." Okay, so how are you defining prophet in that context?
So Moses made some prophecies in his career and his life, and really,
Yeah.
the first one is he's 14 years old, and as I talked about, his family had nothing, no possessions, but one thing they had was this old, torn up, broken Bible that had been passed down the generations.
Mhm.
And Moses writes on a piece of paper, "I'm going to be the best high school player in the country by the end of my junior year." This is when he's 14. This prediction was so ridiculous, it's hard to even explain it
Yeah.
because he'd only been playing ball for a few months, I'm sorry. He'd only been playing a few months. He wasn't very good. There wasn't a whole lot of like great competition in Petersburg. There was no great coaching. There was no reason in the world to suspect that this guy would be a great player, never mind the best player in the country.
Yeah.
But he
Yeah.
did it. He fulfilled it.
Yeah.
And then once he'd done that, he made another prophecy. He said, "I'm going to be the first guy to go straight from high school to pros." And again, there didn't seem to be any avenue to do that. Nobody
Mhm.
was talking about drafting a high school kid at that time. But a year later, that happened.
Mm.
And then,
Mhm.
of course, his most famous was in those 1983 playoffs when he said "faux, faux, faux"
Right.
to Billy Cunningham that they
Right.
were going to win the series, they were going to win the championship without losing a game.
Yeah.
And that didn't quite come true, but it came close. They only lost one game.
Yeah. It
So
was
as
full
he called
five
it
fold.
"faux, faux, five, faux."
Yeah.
So that was kind of the idea behind the basketball prophet, and I think just the way he lived his life, he was kind of this, basketball obsessed. He had blinders on. He only
Yeah.
cared about basketball, and there was no flash to him. There was almost like a purity to his
Yeah.
game in that sense. And then, of course, some of it's just a play on the biblical Moses.
Of the name, of course.
Right.
Um, there's all this talk about greatness, and of course, now we're hearing it, of course, nonstop on talk radio and everything about, comparing eras and comparing this guy to that guy and who's the greatest ever. I don't like getting into those conversations, but you do have a great quote in the book from Moses when he talked about being the best in the game, being the greatest, right? And the quote is quote from Moses. There are a lot of guys who do this. There are a lot of guys who do this if they were in my situation. I'm not the greatest player, but one thing I want to be, I'm sorry, I'm not the greatest player, but one thing I want to be remembered for that I have always tried to be the greatest worker. And look, I spent 20 years with a guy, Kobe, who had that same mentality. He just wanted to work hard and wanted to be remembered for that. And of course, he wanted to be the greatest ever, but that's a whole other story. but
Right.
but from the beginning of this book, you describe even as a young kid how hard he worked in the playgrounds and how hard he worked to help his mom make ends meet, and even his friends and that small circle that stayed with him. And post retirement was intriguing to me because he kind of faded out of the spotlight. I mean, he did show up at some NBA things. I did see him every once in a while, but he wasn't the kind of guy that, like at All Star Weekend, they would roll out. They still do, legends of the game, and guys come out and wave, or internationally, and he wouldn't do that. Like you said, he showed
Right.
up at Spencer's Hall of Fame induction and was very selective. And he didn't even want his number to go up in the rafters. I guess at the Spectrum, right?
Yeah.
Without
Yeah.
his teammates. So that
Yeah.
that says a lot. But were you surprised by his work ethic and all the different, I guess, areas that he just worked his butt off to be as great as he was?
I don't think I was necessarily surprised because I think most, when you're talking about the all-time greats, they have that fire in them.
Hmm.
The only possible exceptions are guys who are just athletic freaks like
Yeah.
like Shaquille.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know if Shaquille had that fire, but Shaquille was Moses didn't, Moses was actually undersized for a center. He was only 6'10". He
Yeah.
wasn't a Shaquille, or Wilt Chamberlain is another one. I don't know that Wilt had that fire, but he was just, again, such an athletic freak that he was
Yeah.
able to be the best without it.
Hmm.
But you look at the other greats, whether it be Michael or Magic or Larry or Tim Duncan, even they had
Hmm.
there's a fire in them. They're
Hmm.
obsessed. They're obsessed with the
Hmm.
game, and they're obsessed with being the best player they can be.
Hmm.
Obviously, Kobe. And so I wasn't that surprised. If
Hmm.
the humility, the lack of ego, I found surprising
Yeah.
because you just don't hear that, right? I mean,
No.
for like that quote that you read, as you know, to a Kobe wanted to be known as the greatest worker ever, and
Hmm.
he wanted to be known as the best player ever.
Right.
And here's Moses basically saying, I don't care if people think I'm the
Yeah.
best. I just
Yeah.
want them to know that I worked hard.
Yeah.
And it's just there was this weird humility to him. I heard close friends of him would tell me like he didn't understand stardom.
Huh.
Like he actually like he seemed bewildered by the idea that people would treat him differently because he was so good.
Huh.
And
Interesting.
it wasn't just blowing smoke because
Yeah.
that's every way he conducted himself was like that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the humility, I just think if you if you're that great at anything and you're making that much money too, I
Hmm.
think it's so rare to maintain that sense of humility. I mean, you've been around
Yeah.
a ton of stars.
Oh, for sure.
It goes that just the money itself that goes to your head, right?
Oh,
And
absolutely.
it seems like it didn't really with him.
Yeah. I think it goes back to his upbringing. I mean, everything I read about his mom, Mary, she kept him grounded.
Yeah,
Of
yeah.
course, their life circumstances kept him grounded. Um, but he never forgot where he came from. And yeah, it's a beautiful thing, man. It's such a great book. And I hope that people pick this book up and learn something if you're an NBA fan or not, but especially if you are an NBA fan, because this is a guy that, I was in the league 40 something years and I really didn't know anything about him. So I appreciate that. And by the way, in your acknowledgments, you mentioned a few people that I know and colleagues and whatsoever. But Teresa Runstetler, her book Blackball,
Wonderful.
is a great companion to this book as well as Mark Spear's book about Spencer. So
Absolutely. I
yes, I
second
hope.
that. Both great books. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
Teresa was very helpful for me.
yeah.
She had come along. Because of the nature of her research, she found a number of articles on Moses in
Mhm.
in black newspapers, black
Mhm.
magazines, that kind of stuff that were
Yeah.
really helpful.
Well, I appreciate you being. You're the third of the trifecta because Mark's been on a couple of times. I had Teresa on after her book came out, so I appreciate it so much, Paul. It was really it's a pleasure meeting you. It was great reading this book. I wish you well, and please come back to the Legends of Sports sometime. Write another book, and you can come back anytime.
Thanks. I would love that. As I told you before we started, I'm a big fan of your work for a long time. I mean, you bring wonderful photos into the world, and
Well,
I thank you for that.
thank you,
So
thank you, thank
it
you.
was really it's special to come on and talk to you.
Well, it's great to meet you, and hopefully our paths will cross in person at some point. But all the best to you and your family, especially this holiday season.
Thanks. Same to you, Andy.
All right, man. Thank you.
All right.
Well, I really, really enjoyed this conversation with author Paul Knepper. Thanks to his book, I have a much better understanding of the greatness of Moses Malone. Check out this book, folks. It's terrific. Thanks as always to our producer, Carlin Barker, and our editors, Sean Gosser and Addison Shao. And thanks everyone for joining us for this episode of the podcast. We are thankful to all our loyal followers. Folks, please tell all your friends to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Legends of Sport, and our Instagram at Legends of Sport, and my photography can be found on Instagram at ADB Photo Inc. Please check out the discount link in our social media to our good friends at Mugsy. We absolutely love Mugsy's clothes. And the discount link to our friends at You Should, the best way you should protect your skin for work, play, and everyday life. Thanks again, folks. We'll be back after the first of the year with another great episode of the Legends of Sport podcast. Happy holidays, everybody.